Joining me now, former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis and Democratic Congressman Colin Allred. Senator Davis, I want to start with you. So just walk us through the game plan here. Texas Democrats successfully broke quorum to delay this bill at the end of the regular session. So do you think that can work here too?
It absolutely can, Zerlina, and it really just depends on the House Democrats' appetite and fortitude to stay away. The governor, of course, 26 days from now, when this special session ends, has the ability and the right to call a second special session, and he can continue to call them every 30 days, and Democrats can choose to continue to stay away. So this is going to be a real test of fortitude and will. But I am so proud of and so impressed by these Texas House Democrats who are willing to fight the fight and demonstrate not only for the public at large and their communities across Texas, but also to lawmakers like Congressman Allred, that we need very much for these voting rights laws to pass at the federal level to provide the protections that Texas so desperately needs.
I mean, it feels to me like this is an existential fight. And Senator Davis, it seems like federal legislation is maybe the only way to go here. Do you think that is the only way to go in order to prevent the harm these voting restrictions will cause if they do become law?
There's no question about it, Zerlina, that federal law is needed to protect voters in the state of Texas, because Republicans here are absolutely bent on continuing to suppress and intimidate people from voting. They know that they are on borrowed time here, because if you look back through the last 3 presidential cycles, you see the momentum for Democrats. In 2012, Republicans won by a 16-point spread. In 2016, they won by a 9-point spread. And in the last election, they won by only a 6-point spread. So they're reading the tea leaves, as are we. And they're trying to do everything they can to suppress the votes, particularly of people in our minority communities in Texas. And if they are allowed to do that, Texas is not going to be reflective of the votes of its citizenry or the desires of its citizenry. And the thing that upsets me the most, you talked about what happened to Crystal Mason and Hervis Rogers. This bill is filled with additional penalties against voters and people who assist voters, and creates absolute criminal threat for people who are trying to register, assist a voter in voting, or the voter themselves.
That's so incredibly scary because, you know, when you're talking about punishment and consequences for not understanding that voting while on parole is illegal, can 20 years, I mean, that's completely insane. That's even a law somewhere, that you could face 20 years in prison for that is maybe a conversation for another day, but maybe evidence, Congressman, of the fact of how serious the situation is and what's really at stake for the voters of your state. So some critics watching, but they may not understand why this is necessary. In your view, why is it so critical for the voters of Texas that you take this dramatic step and you walk out and you leave the state and you prevent this bill from becoming the law?
Well, you know, I think that this is an example of bravery from the Texas House Democrats that to me is reminiscent of a state senator in 2013 who conducted a filibuster for hours on end, standing in tennis shoes, and who inspired me to come back to Texas and to do voting rights on her campaign for governor in 2014. And that's Wendy Davis, who I'm joined by today. And, you know, I can tell you, having done voter protection work on the ground in Texas, having been a voting rights litigator, that these seemingly small changes to voting can have enormous impacts on who can vote. And these aren't just small changes, they are big, as Wendy said. And Zerlina, we've seen this before in this country. We've seen where in certain states, they pass laws so that certain people can't vote. And that has required a federal response to make sure that our democracy is not radically different from state to state. And that's exactly the situation that we're in right now. So I'm proud of the Texas House Democrats for what they've done. But what they're doing is to try and bring attention to and shine a spotlight on the need for us to pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act that we've passed in the House, needs to get through the Senate and to President Biden's desk, and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to restore the provisions in the Voting Rights Act that have been struck down by the Supreme Court previously, and that we will pass later this summer in the House, and we need the Senate to pass that as well.
Congressman, in terms of the message you're taking to Washington, D.C. tomorrow, obviously just going and not allowing for quorum is a message in and of itself. But what is the message that you're taking to the Capitol and that you want legislators on Capitol Hill to hear coming directly from you from the state of Texas?
Well, I think people need to know what's happening in Texas, and I think they need to understand how serious this is, and how, as you said, this is already the state in the country where it's the hardest to vote. We already have a huge turnout problem in terms of that we are always in the bottom 10 in the country in terms of how many folks come out to vote here in the state of Texas, and it's not because people don't want to. It's because it's so difficult to. And so we need to have federal protections. We need to have senators who may be in states where this is not occurring, or maybe in states where different things are happening, to understand just how urgent this is. We need the White House, of course, also to make this a top priority. And I'm glad to see that President Biden is going to be giving an address, I think this week, on voting rights in Philadelphia. We need every single lever of government, every single person who cares about our democracy to understand what's happening in Texas and to help us respond to it.
Senator Davis, as the congressman mentioned, back in 2013, you held that 13-hour-long filibuster in the pink sneakers. I think it's sort of an iconic photo at this point. But that abortion bill that you were filibustering, it ultimately passed during session. What do you say to critics who say, you're just delaying the inevitable? What's the point of doing some sort of dramatic protest to make the points that you want to make?
I just believe we have to use every tool in our arsenal to fight when the lives and the liberties of people in our state are at stake. And this is certainly one of those instances. If people don't have the basic right to vote, then they won't have the opportunity to elect people who will fight for them on the Texas Senate floor and the Texas House floor. And that's just wrong. And it's not just wrong, it's unconstitutional. And I am really hoping and praying that our federal partners like Congressman Allred and others are successful in continuing their fight at the federal level to pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act so that Texans will be protected and Americans across this country and other states that are seeing some similar voter suppression efforts will have those protections as well. We cannot argue that we are a true democracy when Republicans who are in power right now are fighting to take away people's basic civil liberty to participate in elections. And that's exactly what's happening right now in Texas.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.